A company rejected a decorated female veteran because the scar on her neck didn't fit their corporate image. 20 minutes later, 6 military SUVs blockaded their building, and a colonel stepped out with a promise to keep. Sarah Hayes straightened the collar of her crisp white blazer, took a deep breath, and walked into the glass and steel lobby of Graysteel Logistics. At 36, she was a master of controlling her nerves, a skill honed not in boardrooms, but on the chaotic supply lines of Afghanistan. Today's mission, land a senior logistics manager position, a role for which she was, on paper, a perfect candidate. 8 years as an Army Logistics Staff Sergeant, a Bronze Star for meritorious service, and a recently completed MBA. She was more than qualified, she was an expert. Tucked neatly under her collar, a thin silk scarf concealed the one part of her resume she couldn't list, the jagged, puckered scar that traversed the left side of her neck. The initial interview was a success. She met with the technical team, a group of sharp, no-nonsense engineers who cared about results, not appearances. She laid out her portfolio with military precision, detailing her experience managing supply chains for thousands of troops across hostile territories. She spoke of optimizing resource allocation under extreme pressure, of coordinating equipment deliveries amidst rocket attacks. They were impressed. Her answers were sharp, her strategic plans were flawless, and her deep understanding of international logistics networks was undeniable. They peppered her with questions, and she answered each one with a calm confidence that left them nodding in approval. One of the senior engineers, a man named Peterson, even commented that her crisis management protocols were more advanced than their current system. The final stage was the cultural fit interview with the human resources team, led by a man named Archer, whose smile was as polished and superficial as the marble lobby. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The questions were no longer about strategy and efficiency, they were about personality, about image. The room was warm, and after an hour of intense presentations, Sarah felt a bead of sweat trickle down her neck. Unconsciously, she reached up and loosened the silk scarf, allowing it to fall slightly, exposing the top of the scar. The change in the room was instantaneous and chilling. Archer's engaged smile faded, replaced by a flicker of discomfort. His eyes, and the eyes of the two women flanking him, darted to her neck and then quickly away. They exchanged subtle, uncomfortable glances. One of the women began tapping her pen nervously on the table. The warm, welcoming atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a sudden, invisible wall of ice. Their questions became vague, their interest waned. They were no longer looking at a brilliant logistics expert, they were looking at a flaw, a blemish, an imperfection that didn't fit their polished corporate aesthetic. The interview concluded abruptly. Archer stood, his smile back in place, but it no longer reached his eyes. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he picked up a pre-printed letter from his desk and handed it to her. "Thank you for coming in, Sergeant Hayes," he said, the use of her rank now sounding condescending. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate who we feel better fits our company image." No explanation. No feedback. No discussion of the impressive qualifications the technical team had just lauded. Just one cold, dismissive sentence. Sarah stood there, holding the letter, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. 8 years of service, 3 combat deployments, a Bronze Star, an MBA, none of it mattered. They hadn't rejected her skills. They had rejected her scars. Sarah walked out of the Graysteel Logistics building in a daze, the polite, sterile hum of the lobby a stark contrast to the roaring in her ears. She clutched the rejection letter, the crisp paper a symbol of a judgment far crueler than any she had faced on the battlefield. She made it to the manicured stone steps outside the entrance before her legs felt unsteady, and she sank down, her mind replaying the final moments of the interview, the shift in their eyes, Archer's dismissive tone, the cold finality of the letter. The scar on her neck, usually a dull, familiar tightness, began to burn, as if the memory of its creation had been reawakened. The polished glass of the corporate building dissolved, replaced by the memory of a different kind of heat, a different kind of light. The flashback hit her with the force of a physical blow. The air in Kandahar, thick with dust and the smell of diesel. She was in the lead vehicle of a supply convoy, a young staff sergeant responsible for getting critical medical supplies to a forward operating base. In the vehicle behind hers was a squad of fresh-faced infantrymen, including the son of her commanding officer, Colonel Franklin Maddox. They were kids, really. The world exploded without warning. A suicide bomber had rammed a vehicle laden with explosives into the side of the convoy. Her vehicle was thrown sideways. Through the ringing in her ears and the acrid smoke, she saw it. The second vehicle, the one carrying the colonel's son, was on fire, its occupants dazed and vulnerable to the ambush that was sure to follow. Her training screamed at her to seek cover, to secure her own position. But her humanity, her duty as a sergeant, screamed louder. She scrambled out of her disabled vehicle and ran toward the burning wreck. Gunfire erupted from a nearby building. She ignored it. She reached the door, wrenched it open, and began pulling the dazed, wounded young soldiers out, dragging them one by one toward the relative safety of a roadside ditch. She was on her last man, the colonel's son, when a piece of shrapnel from a secondary explosion tore through the air. Instinctively, she shoved the young private down and twisted her own body to shield him. She felt a searing, white-hot pain in her neck as the metal sliced through flesh and muscle. She didn't scream. She just kept pulling, her voice a raw, hoarse rasp as she yelled for a medic, her own blood staining the sand. She came back to the present with a shuddering gasp, the memory receding, leaving the phantom ache in its place. She sat on the steps of a building that valued polished appearances over proven courage, a hero deemed unfit because her sacrifice was visible. It was in this moment of profound despair that her phone buzzed. It was Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a man who had served with her on that final deployment. He had seen her hopeful LinkedIn post that morning about her big interview. "So, how'd it go, Sarge? They roll out the red carpet for you?" he asked, his voice full of cheerful optimism. The question broke something in her. Her own voice, when it came out, was the same hoarse whisper it had been since the injury. They said I didn't fit their company image, Mike." She tried to keep the emotion out of her voice, but he heard it. He knew her too well. "What? What does that even mean?" A pause. "Sarah, was it the scar?" She couldn't answer. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. The silence was his answer. On the other end of the line, Mike Rodriguez felt a familiar, cold rage build in his chest. "Who did you interview with?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet now. "An HR manager. A guy named Archer." "Okay, Sarah. You just sit tight. I need to make a phone call." He hung up before she could protest. The resolve was no longer hers to bear alone. The call for reinforcements had been made. Colonel Franklin Maddox was reviewing logistical reports in his office at Fort Braxton when his personal cell phone rang. It was a number he recognized instantly. "Rodriguez," he answered, his voice a low rumble. "What's wrong?" "Sir," Mike Rodriguez's voice was tight with a fury the colonel knew well. "It's about Sergeant Hayes. Do you remember the promise you made her?" The colonel's world narrowed. The reports on his desk blurred into insignificance. The promise. It was a vow made 3 years ago, in the sterile, antiseptic quiet of a military hospital in Germany. The flashback was a memory of profound gratitude and overwhelming debt. He stood by the bedside of a young staff sergeant, Sarah Hayes, whose neck was swathed in bandages. His own son, Private Evan Maddox, sat in a chair nearby, his arm in a cast, but alive. Alive because of her. "I read the after-action report, Sergeant," Maddox had said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "What you did, you saved my boy. You saved them all." Sarah, her voice a painful, hoarse whisper, had simply replied, "Just doing my job, sir." "No," Maddox had insisted, his hand gripping her shoulder. "That was more than a job. That was heroism. If you ever need anything, anywhere, anytime, you call me. I don't care if I'm retired or on the other side of the world. I will be there. That is my promise to you." He came back to the present, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. "What happened, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Rodriguez recounted the story Sarah had told him, the perfect interview, the revealed scar, the cold rejection based on her company image. Colonel Maddox listened in absolute silence. When Rodriguez finished, the colonel said only 4 words. "What's the company's address?" After he hung up, he stood and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling base. He was a man of logic, a master of supply chains and strategic movements. His mind began to formulate a plan. A lawsuit was one option. A call to the media was another. Both were slow, uncertain, and would drag Sarah through a public battle she didn't deserve. No. This wasn't a legal problem. This was an issue of honor. And it required a different kind of response. A response that was immediate, unequivocal, and delivered with the full, crushing weight of the community Gray Steel Logistics had just insulted. His planning was swift. It was a logistical operation. He didn't call lawyers. He activated a network far more powerful. His phone began to dial numbers he knew by heart. "Williams," he said into the phone. "It's Maddox. I need you. Dress blues. Torres, Maddox here. We're moving. I'll send you the coordinates. Brooks, it's time to keep a promise." One by one, he called them. Master sergeants, captains, lieutenant colonels. Veterans all. Men and women who had served with Sarah, who had been saved by her, who owed her. The response was the same every time. "When and where, sir?" The plan was not a protest. It was a show of force. A public demonstration of honor. 6 black, government-plated SUVs would converge on Gray Steel Logistics. Not to intimidate, but to educate. Not to threaten, but to bear witness. They would remind a company obsessed with image what true substance looked like. At exactly 12:40 p.m., 20 minutes after Mike Rodriguez's call, the quiet, corporate tranquility of Gray Steel Logistics was shattered. The rumble came first, a low, powerful thrum that vibrated through the building's glass walls. Employees, on their way to lunch, paused and looked up from their phones. Then they appeared. 6 black military SUVs, turning the corner in perfect, synchronized formation, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun like the impassive eyes of predators. They didn't slow down. They roared into the company's sprawling parking lot, tires screeching as each vehicle executed a perfect, diagonal park, their bumpers just inches from each other. In less than 30 seconds, they had formed an impenetrable blockade, sealing every entrance and exit to the building. No one could leave. No one could enter. The corporate headquarters was, for all intents and purposes, under siege. Panic erupted. Security guards fumbled for their radios, their voices cracking as they tried to describe the unbelievable scene. Employees pressed against the second-floor windows, their phones out, live-streaming the surreal invasion. The lunch crowd from nearby restaurants spilled onto the sidewalks, pointing and whispering. Then, the doors of the SUVs opened in unison. 6 figures emerged. They were not soldiers in combat gear, they were officers in their immaculate, A-class dress uniforms. Medals glittered on their chests. Their shoes were polished to a mirror shine. They formed a single, silent line, facing the building's main entrance. Their leader, Colonel Franklin Maddox, stood at the center, his shoulders back, his eyes fixed on the glass doors. This was the psychological operation. There was no shouting, no weapons drawn. There was only the overwhelming, crushing power of their silent, disciplined presence. They didn't have to say a word. Their uniforms, their medals, their very bearing screamed a message that every employee in that building understood instinctively: you have made a terrible mistake. You have offended something far more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Colonel Maddox began to walk toward the entrance, his team falling into a perfect V formation behind him. His boots struck the pavement with an authority that echoed across the now silent parking lot. He didn't knock. He didn't wait for permission. He walked straight through the automatic glass doors, his team following like an honor guard. The lobby, moments before a hub of corporate chatter, fell completely silent. The receptionist stared, her hand frozen over her phone. A junior executive stopped mid-stride, his briefcase slipping from his numb fingers. Maddox stopped in the center of the polished marble floor. He scanned the terrified faces, his gaze finally landing on the receptionist. His voice was not a shout, but it filled the cavernous space with its absolute command. "I am Colonel Franklin Maddox of the United States Army," he announced. "I am looking for the man who just informed Staff Sergeant Sarah Hayes that her sacrifice for this country doesn't fit your company's image. I suggest you find him immediately." The HR manager, Archer, was summoned. He emerged from the elevator, his face pale, a nervous twitch at the corner of his eye. He saw the 6 decorated officers standing in a formidable line in his lobby, and his carefully constructed corporate composure crumbled. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice a reedy squeak. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about our hiring process." Colonel Maddox took a single step forward. The other officers remained perfectly still, a silent, imposing jury. "Misunderstanding," the colonel's voice was dangerously soft. "Let me clarify something for you, Mr. Archer. That woman you just dismissed has more integrity, courage, and leadership in her scarred throat than your entire company has in its polished boardroom." He gestured to the Master Sergeant on his right. "This is Master Sergeant Williams. Ask him about Sarah Hayes." Williams stepped forward. His voice was a low, powerful rumble. "Ma'am. I call her ma'am out of respect. I was pinned down in a firefight outside of Tikrit. We were out of ammo, out of time. Staff Sergeant Hayes, under heavy fire, drove a supply truck through a half-mile of enemy territory to get to us. She saved my entire platoon that day." Her voice is hoarse because she spent 6 hours on the radio, choking on dust and smoke, coordinating our evac while taking fire. The colonel gestured to the captain on his left. "Captain Torres, tell him about Sarah Hayes." "Yes, sir," the captain said, her eyes boring into Archer. "I was a green lieutenant on my first deployment. A mortar attack hit our command post. I froze. It was Sarah who tackled me to the ground, shielding me with her own body. That scar on her neck. She got that because a piece of shrapnel was meant for me." One by one, they told their stories. Each testimony was a hammer blow, dismantling Archer's pathetic excuse about company image. The employees who had gathered in the lobby listened, their faces a mixture of awe and shame. They were learning the true story behind the scar, the true measure of the woman their company had just cast aside. The entire confrontation was, of course, being live-streamed by dozens of employees. The video of 6 military SUVs blockading a corporate headquarters, followed by decorated officers defending the honor of their sister-in-arms, was an irresistible narrative. The hashtag #StandWithSergeantSarah exploded on social media. Within an hour, the story was the #1 trending topic in the country. Veterans from every branch shared the video, adding their own stories of post-service discrimination. The Battle Scars and Brotherhood blog posted archive photos of Sarah in Afghanistan, pulling wounded soldiers from the battlefield. The images were powerful, undeniable proof of her heroism. The checkmate came when an anonymous insider from Graysteel's HR department, disgusted by the company's actions, leaked Archer's internal emails to a major news outlet. One message read, "The veteran candidate has prominent neck scarring and vocal damage that do not align with our modern, client-facing brand aesthetics." It was a smoking gun. The company's carefully crafted PR statements about misunderstanding were blown to pieces. The public backlash was immediate and catastrophic. Corporate clients began calling, demanding explanations. the company's stock began to plummet. Back in the lobby, Colonel Maddox held up his phone, showing the leaked email to the now trembling Archer. "Your standards seem to be very well documented, Mr. Archer," the colonel said, his voice like ice. "You didn't reject a candidate. You rejected a hero. You spit on a sacrifice made for this country. And now, the world knows exactly who you are." Archer could only stare, his face ashen. He was no longer a manager. He was a pariah, his career and reputation destroyed in a matter of hours. The justice wasn't delivered in a courtroom. It was delivered right here, in the marble lobby of his own glass tower, by a team of soldiers who had come to keep a promise. Part 6, The Aftermath / A New Mission. The downfall of Greysteel Logistics was swift and brutal. Within a week, facing a congressional inquiry and the loss of 3 major clients, the CEO resigned. Archer was fired, becoming a poster child for corporate insensitivity. The company issued multiple, groveling apologies and donated a substantial sum to veterans organizations, but the damage to their brand was permanent. 1 week after the incident, Sarah Hayes received a letter. It bore the official letterhead of the Department of Defense. It was not a rejection. It was an offer. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," the letter began. "Your reputation precedes you. We have an opening for a strategic logistics advisor for the Northeast Regional Command. The position requires proven experience in crisis management and supply chain coordination under extreme pressure. Your combat deployment record is your primary qualification. We don't need an interview. We know exactly who you are." The position paid significantly more than the one at Greysteel, but more importantly, it was a role that valued her scars not as a flaw, but as a testament to her qualifications. Her experience under fire was not a liability to be hidden, it was the very thing that made her invaluable. Sarah's first day at her new office at the Regional Military Operations Center was a quiet, profound victory. She wore her army dress uniform for the orientation ceremony. As she walked in, she saw a bronze plaque honoring fallen service members. It read, "It's not your voice that makes people listen. It's what you did before you spoke." Her new supervisor, a brigadier general, greeted her personally. "We've been following your career for years, Sarah," she said. "We need people who understand real sacrifice, not people who judge others for making it. Welcome home." Sarah's office overlooked a harbor where military vessels prepared for deployment. She realized this wasn't just a job, it was a continuation of her service. Her new mission was not just managing logistics, but also advocating for change. She joined a newly formed DoD task force dedicated to improving employment opportunities for wounded veterans. She used her voice, hoarse, scarred, but now more powerful than ever, to ensure that the prejudice she faced would not be the reality for the next generation of returning heroes. She had found her purpose again, not by hiding her scars, but by embracing them as the medals of honor they truly were. This story is a powerful reminder that our scars are not signs of weakness, but proof of our resilience. They are a testament to the battles we have survived. True value is not in a flawless appearance, but in the strength of character forged in fire. What scars, visible or invisible, make you stronger? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of honor and justice moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone whose strength deserves to be seen. And comment "honor" to show your support.